Okay, so we're going to now call the special board meeting to order. And I'm calling it to order at 7:03. May I have a roll call, please?
Here.
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 Here. Here.
Here.
Here. Okay, so in case you didn't know, Scott's in the computer over there. He's in Argentina. So thank you very much, Scott, for participating. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Oh, okay. Thought you were going to say something profound there for a second. All right. Okay, good evening, everyone. I wanted to kick off tonight's meeting with a few words, and it's actually more than a few, so bear with me. First, we've received much feedback from our community, and we've read or heard all of your input and are grateful for your engagement and feedback. Secondly, for those of you who don't know me, I am Kristen Hertel, president of the school board. I am a mother of 5 girls who all attended Greeley School. My girls and I walked to school as often as possible, and the girls always came home for lunch. After you've had 5 girls, 3 of which are triplets, in a school over a 9-year period, you get to know most, if not all, of the teachers, and they certainly get to know your whole family. A year ago, on the last day of school after my youngest child graduated, I said goodbye to all the faculty at Greeley with tears in my eyes. When I get a chance, even now, I still like to go over and visit. It was my experience at Greeley School that made me even consider running for the school board. I have so much passion for the schools, teachers, and our approach to teaching and learning. I wanted to give back to the community that gave my family so much. Tonight, this board continues to focus on our educational master facility plan. It is our goal by the end of the evening that we can direct the core team on next steps as we continue to ask 3 major questions. How do we handle our enrollment imbalance? How do we most responsibly upgrade our aging buildings? And while we are upgrading our school's infrastructure, do our facilities support the needs of our children and teachers given today's educational best practices? We have heard very strong opposition to the construction of the centralized concept. I hear you. As a result, I do not see this as a priority as we narrow our focus. But do keep in mind, this option has the benefit of new construction of state-of-the-art facilities for our students and teachers, lower operating costs, and a potentially lower tax burden over its useful life. Our schools are on average over 80 years old. We have significant aging infrastructure and space issues. This has a significant impact on the educational experience of our children. Let me give you some examples. When our elementary schools were built, more mothers stayed at home and most of the children went home for lunch every day. As a result, our schools don't have cafeterias. Today, the majority of our students stay at school for lunch and eat in our auditoriums and entry halls since there are no lunchrooms. Should we add cafeterias to the elementary schools to alleviate the situation? Crow Island's community has felt the biggest impact of the enrollment challenges. Crow Island does not have kindergarten due to space constraints. This is clearly not ideal. Should we add more capacity to provide space for kindergarten? Should we prioritize any work at Crow Island as we discuss timelines? Many areas within our buildings lack appropriate temperature control. At the beginning of the school year and at the end of the school year, our classrooms can reach 90+ degrees. I have even seen a thermometer hit over 100 degrees. The children and teachers get exhausted and find it difficult to focus. Should we add air conditioning to our schools? Many of the heating boilers have surpassed their useful lives, and some of our steam pipes are original to the buildings. At what point does it make sense to replace them? Technology plays a significant role in educating our children today. Many classrooms only have a few electrical outlets, which are inadequate to support all of the iPads and computers being used. Should we modernize our building's electrical capacity to reduce the risk of fire and allow for modern technology? Today, we must teach our children how to collaborate with each other, work in small groups, and work on large-scale projects like the opera that Bert mentioned during our last meeting. At present, our children are doing this on the floors in our hallways where teachers have difficulty keeping an eye on them. Do we want to modify our buildings to add collaborative spaces? School violence is increasing. What do we need to do to ensure our building security is up to date so we can uphold the greatest safety standards for our students and teachers? Currently, our buildings are not easily accessible to all of our students, teachers, and community members, including disabled persons. What do we need to do to ensure equal access and comply with state and federal laws? We need to consider all of these issues within the context of declining enrollment, our property tax burden, and the state of affairs in Illinois. In fact, last year, 48 students of ours moved out of the state. Initially, the last board asked the administration, and I think I put this on the docket for, maybe I'm asking the question why, but last board, we asked the administration to consider providing AC in our schools. Before we considered investing money in new AC, that board decided to undergo facility master planning. This was also to address the enrollment challenges that we identified in two and a half years ago. So we set out to create the first facility master plan that had been done in 20 years. The master facility planning process is arduous at best. We have a core team consisting of community members, teachers, and administrators dedicated to researching the needs of our students, the needs of our aging infrastructure, and the ideal teaching environments that will allow our children to develop the critical thinking, collaboration, and team building skills needed in today's world and going forward. The core team, with the assistance of DLR, has worked tirelessly to establish a continuum of options for the board and this community to consider. Continuum means maintain, enhance, transform, or anything in between. So far in this process, this board has heard the importance of neighborhood schools to this community. I'm among this crowd. However, it was this board's fiduciary responsibility to ask the question, what does it cost our community to run 5 aging schools in need of significant upgrades and given our declining enrollment? Is it cheaper to just build a new school? Given our fiduciary responsibilities to the community, we had to analyze the question. Again, given the strong community opposition, we are unlikely to move in this direction, even though it would provide your children with a modern state-of-the-art building and eliminate future enrollment issues. As a community, we will decide how to spend our tax dollars. As a community, we will determine how our facilities will support our vision of teaching and learning. With the help of the core team and DLR, we will have the information with which to make an informed decision. By the end of tonight, it is our goal that the board can give clear direction so we can direct the core team on next steps. Together, I am confident that this community can and will come together to arrive at the most optimal solution to meet the needs of our students, teachers, and community. Thank you.
So this evening, welcome, and first of all, we did receive some feedback from the last session, so I want to thank our tech department for making some improvements to the speakers, added a camera, and so the quality of the recording should be improved for those of your neighbors and other community members who aren't able to make this evening, or if you want to go back and watch any of tonight's events again. To our board members, just a reminder to please speak into the microphone as it picks up. It's important for the video for people to hear, so please do that. So as Kristen had introduced, we want to make sure that the core team has enough information, enough direction from the school board this evening to proceed and make progress so that they can return to the board at the next meeting on May 22nd with some further analysis. So tonight, it's our goal to have the board help narrow the concepts under consideration, to determine enrollment variance thresholds for modeling. So for instance, right now, all of our concepts are built upon next year's enrollment, as it is the highest enrollment that we have in our 10-year projections. At the same time, though, when we look at history, we see that we have peaks and valleys throughout our time as a district, and we've heard from our community members too who have said, let's make sure we have a long-term view and have some plans for when enrollment may rebound. So we do need some direction, and we have some context for the board for this consideration to give us to what degree do we want the enrollment variance, what percentage do we want to use for our future planning. And then we also want to affirm our baseline components, so the core components or foundational components of any educational master facility plan that we might produce. The core team has made some assumptions based on discussions with hearing from the board, but also their own analysis. So we want to get board direction and affirmation on that as well. Once we have that, at the very end of the meeting, we just want to make sure that there is an understanding and agreement among the board members regarding the analysis tool that the core team will use then after this evening to go with the remaining concepts, to use that tool to return back to the board and the community with a greater depth and understanding of the concepts that are still at play. So that is our goal this evening. So as I said, we want to get clear direction in the areas from the board. The core team will come back on May 22nd. It's a 2-week time frame, so they'll do the best they can in that 2 weeks. If there's one scheduled meeting, they'll potentially add another one. Come back with some analysis so the board can further refine the direction with the goal of June, having the board choose a final direction for the educational master facility plan. Once the board does approve, or if they approve it at that time, the next step then would be to, again, with that focus, further engage our community, have more opportunity for community involvement to look at more details, look at timing, look at the cost more carefully. So there's still quite a bit more to do once the board gives us final direction on this plan. So that is for this evening our goal.
Where's the morning?
I'm right here.
Do we have?
So nobody signed up for the first comment, everybody deferred to the second.
Okay, awesome. All right, okay. So everybody has in front of them, I think, this decision flow, did you refer to it as?
Yes.
The decision flow, that has 5 elements to it, 5. Yep, okay. So what we want to do is go through this list of decisions so that we can hopefully arrive at majority consensus, and so we can give direction to the core team. So I think what we want to do, I think might be the best efficient way to do this, is for us to just go issue by issue, get a pulse from the board and see where everybody is, and then we can have as much discussion as we need to, and then if we can get majority consensus, then we'll just move on to the next issue. So if that works for everybody. So the first issue is where do we want to focus the work of the core team at this time? Neighborhood schools or transform? So going from 5 buildings or going down to, I guess, going from 5 down to 4 perhaps, or going from 5 down to 2, right? So I'm opening that point up for discussion. Anybody?
I'll start if you want.
Yeah.
I think you said it well. I think that we've heard clearly. I think most of us have read everything, and all of us have read almost everything from the neighbors. But I think we also, at least in my situation, believe there is a lot of value in K through 5. I really appreciate the core team showing us the cost of what that value is to us, because I think transform, as you said, is cheaper. Longer term, one big building is cheaper. But I would believe K through 5 is the right direction for us to go forward.
Can I jump in? Are we doing, right now, are we doing a more broad discussion about keeping neighborhood schools compared to transform?
Yes.
Sorry, and I'll go back up a level. So the neighborhood schools would be where I would say it would be, I would think we should go that way.
Okay, so Jennifer, did you want to?
And I agree. I think the feedback from the community about community schools and the benefits for family and learning with that model indicates that even though Transform is interesting and has some cost savings and does deliver all new space at once, it's not an appropriate fit right now based on our community schools and how they operate. Okay.
I would agree. I think we've heard from the majority of the community that they don't want to do, that they want to keep neighborhood schools in some form or another, whether it's K3, K4, K5, we can talk about later. The one note I would have is that I think there has been a greater loyalty to the current neighborhood schools in certain of the communities, particularly in the Greeley and somewhat Hubbard Woods. I think the Crow Island families, having borne the impact of having to move kindergartners out this year, have tacos in place, are recognizing that the current situation isn't necessarily better than particularly a Transform option. I'm speaking generally, so I'm sure there are many Crow Island families that would disagree with me. But my only point of this is that I think we have to recognize that right now it's not really equal, and there are people who are perhaps not quite as happy as other people in the community with the neighborhood schools. That being said, I think the majority across all three schools have been in favor of keeping the neighborhood schools in some form or another, perhaps just not exactly as they are right now. Does that make sense?
I agree, and I think when your kindergartner is not going to your community school, it's a different viewpoint through this discussion.
Well, it's not as much of a community school anymore, and you can't send your kids there because there's not room for them.
Steve, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's fairly clear if we're going to take the step to provide direction to the core team to have them explore more deeply the neighborhood school idea. I would suggest though that we look at this in terms of perhaps suspending exploration of the Transform idea, because I do think even when we dig deeper into the neighborhood schools, having a comparative to what the Transform provides, both in terms of whether it's educational environment, whether it's cost, is important for us to always keep, ready.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. Matt, do you want?
I think it's if I put my taxpayer hat on, hey, we're gonna get a brand new school and it's gonna save me money. Like, that's interesting from an educational perspective. Hey, we're gonna centralize, there's arguments for, pro, and against, but in worst case, it's more flexible. For sure, we can certainly add capacity. So I put on those, from those lenses, like the Transform option is clearly better. From a cultural perspective, I personally like the neighborhood schools. I think our community spoke, and it just tells you in terms of a value, which is what I was trying to highlight. From a value perspective, our community values culture above finance, and I think that is something that speaks, and I think we have to listen. So I appreciate it. It certainly should. We can look at it, but I think it's a no.
Okay. And then Scott.
Scott?
There's a slight delay.
Scott, can you hear us?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I would say that I am in agreement probably that the neighborhood schools is very important, and that's where they want the attention of this board to focus their attention on. And I'm in agreement that we should probably table Transform at this point in time to figure out how we can operate with the neighborhood school model.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything else left they want to? comment? Okay, so, I mean, I'm with the majority for sure on neighborhood versus transform. However, I think it's, as Steve said, I think it's really important to keep it out there so that we have a means of comparison, so that we can say once we get the models or the ideas together on, you know, what our neighborhood schools look like, we have a way to compare it to how is this going to cost us versus just building it, right? Like we would do if we were rehabbing our own house. So, okay, so it sounds like from my count that we have everybody on board with focusing on neighborhood schools as opposed to transform. Is that accurate? Okay.
Although, let me add one quick thing.
Yep.
I think the handles we've given these options have been, I think, distracting to a certain degree for some folks. So at the risk of continuing some of that, what I would like to urge the core team to do when they start to explore more deeply is to think about the spirit of what Transform was there to do, right, in terms of the educational environment and the potential experience that kids would get. The challenge I would give them is how could you replicate some of that within the environment of the neighborhood schools, and what might that look like? Because by suspending Transform, I don't want to suspend the ideals of Transform or the spirit of Transform. I want to apply that potentially to an option within the neighborhood schools.
Okay.
And I just also, I know maybe not tonight, I know we're going to talk in more detail about sort of the iterations that would go along with keeping neighborhood schools, but I want to make sure we're giving equal focus to the higher levels. So whether it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 5, 6, 7, 8, or 6, 7, 8, all of our kids are going to end up there. So thinking about what we're doing with neighborhood schools will obviously have to go hand in hand with what we do after they leave the neighborhood schools. And I think for that reason in particular, keeping the transform option, as Steve said, is something that we're looking to, from a vision perspective, if nothing else, is valuable. But just encourage that we are focusing on neighborhood schools, but we are also going to be focusing on that, you know, what we do with the kids once they leave the neighborhood schools.
Right. And that's further down on the page, so it's not going to get lost. Okay, so it sounds like we have majority consensus on item number 1. Item number 2 is the baseline contains the foundational elements the district would include in the educational master facility plan. The core team has made the assumption of the following components for baseline: health, life safety, accessibility, and cosmetic, safety and security, HVAC with air conditioning. So what we want to do here is try to conclude what we feel like are the have-to-haves in the buildings. So the baseline is going to be for all the buildings. Do we feel like we have to put air conditioning in? Do we feel like we have to do the new HVAC, the boilers and the water steam pipes or whatever, safety and security, so that we can just say, okay, this is basic without anything else, what we have to have in these buildings. Updated electrical, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, you might want to, we've kind of
adapted.
put easier to read checkboxes. The board wants to go through those and look at those, but this has been a bit of an evolving concept since we've started talking about the components of the potential master plan. So these were all the assumptions that were placed. Kristen already read through those, but you can see what they are, and you know, we'd like to get the greater consensus or majority support of the board to determine if all of these belong in that basic assumption or baseline, so that when we go to build and go to cost out, what these options are, this would, whatever you agree to in here would be included as the basic component of the educational master facility plan.
Does that make sense?
Do we want to go through the list or get a temperature read from around the table and Scott?
Let's go through the list.
Okay. So we've got health, life safety items first on the docket. Does it make sense to kind of summarize what that includes so that we have a...
Right, so that is,
So can I ask a question before we get into the plan? there's only 6 items, and I hate that it's not a la carte, but the challenge that the core team is having is it because these things can't be separated out to come up with a cost. I'm just trying to understand, like, I think the one that's going to have to be toughest for us to have a conversation about is air conditioning. And why can't that be an added line item to some basic level?
So it can be, so we're just trying to say, we're trying to minimize any continued ambiguity in some of the plans. We're trying to narrow our focus, so as many of these as you can check off, it's just easier saying we don't have to revisit this conversation again. So if there's certain items on here that you do want to revisit or line out, and we can certainly just continue to do that. Just we're trying to streamline our process and our work.
So it's clear we're making the assumption that this is what is in every plan.
And can we agree this is, I mean, we're going to clearly revisit any items before we finally come back to a final plan?
Absolutely.
Which we know, this is conceptual.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just making sure.
Yeah. Yep. No, this is nothing. I mean, this is merely to give the core team a direction. So, do you want to go through this list?
Yes, we can start with health, life, safety items.
Okay.
Those are typically assessed through a 10-year life safety survey through the ROE. There are different levels of necessity. Some need to be done within 12 months, some within 2 to 3 years, and some can be done over a 10-year period. They include major systems in a building, such as boilers, air conditioning units in areas that we do have air conditioning, rooftop units. They include plumbing, mechanical, electrical upgrades that need to be done in each building, fire safety, things along those lines, and they range in cost from minimal to over $1 million for things like roofs and mechanical systems.
You've just been doing health, life, safety stuff on an ongoing basis.
Yes, correct.
I know we've put a few things, we've been kind of slowing it down because we need this, we need some.
Yes, we've been typically doing between $2 and $2.5 million a year out of both utilizing some bond funds that were left over from 2008, as well as utilizing our operating funds to take care of some of these projects. Each summer, we have kind of put it on hold for the summer, given that we're in the middle of the master facility plan.
So what is the, call it backlog that would need to be done sort of day one once we kind of make a decision? What's the amount? Do you think it's like, we can't put those kind of things
You know,
on?
we have several $1 million that are remaining from our last health life safety survey. Nothing obviously that's an immediate need, but some of the items would need to be addressed as soon as we decide how we're moving forward. Once we decide how we're moving forward, then it'll be easier to start planning out. We were supposed to do some system upgrades in Greeley this year, but again, those have been put on hold for.
So when this is the baseline assumption, then are we saying these are things we will address, not necessarily day one, but that we're acknowledging over the next 3, 4, 5,
Yes.
maybe as long as 10, we will have to do
Yes,
it?
correct.
Okay, so that it goes into baseline, but there's not necessarily a timeline attached to that.
No, we do have mapped out timeline for the items that remain from the last health life safety survey.
Does this include this summer, the work in Washburn, or what?
No, that's some emergency work we're doing for the piping this summer. That wasn't identified as part of the health life safety survey. It was.
So this is rolling forward?
Yes.
This package?
Correct.
This does not include, I know you mentioned the electric upgrade, there's some people, that has been a topic that's come up in emails, conversations, but that does not include electrical upgrades for systems to improve their capacity or extra outlets or things like that. This is really basic life safety work.
And it doesn't replace your drinking water pipes, is that right?
Right, the domestic water pipes or the drinking water pipes, that's a pretty invasive process actually, that you have to go into walls and asbestos removal, and that is not in there.
What, sorry, was that last one?
Domestic water pipe replacement, so that's just not in a health life safety scope.
Can I just sort of say, in this list, is electrical upgrades and water upgrades or whatever we need to do in here anywhere in baseline? Because to me, those are baseline items, both of those. We can't have brownouts at our schools anymore, and we can't have water that we're questioning.
The electrical upgrades, if you're, Adam can maybe chime in here, or Director Blaines-Browns, but electrical updates are a little bit easier to manage, less intrusive. We're not alone. The water pipe, the domestic water pipe upgrades are just destructive almost to some of the parts of the building, and you would it's a high degree of renovation in order to get to the pipes actually.
We have been taking care, last summer we did do some water piping that ran horizontally, but the vertical piping that lies behind walls is the stuff that's more destructive that we need to kind of take down drywall or whatever's masonry that's behind.
But just to be clear, those two are not in this list in our
Correct.
second.
Correct, they aren't included in health, life, safety.
But just so I understand the status quo too, because we had this discussion a little while ago, the water, we have tested all drinking fountains, all hand washing facilities in kindergarten and first grade, is that right? And we tested all kitchen facilities, and all of that water is potable. It's only the ones like hand washing stations and others that we just don't know because we haven't paid money to test, right?
We have taken some drinking fountains out of service that we did find and took the bubblers out so they are not in use and marked, so they have no running water to them. We are currently in the process of testing our water again. It was required only in kindergarten and first grade, but we did a more expansive testing, and we're doing testing last week and this week, and we should have results in the next week. But we'll continue to test.
But I think maybe it was Adam that was talking about that when we were at the facilities subcommittee meeting, was saying that to test everything would be prohibitively expensive. So we are testing everything that someone might drink out of or cook with, or if it's very young children, wash their hands in because but we aren't testing every other sink in the building because it's very expensive to do that, right?
We are far above and beyond what the minimum requirement would be in any schools district. So we continue we tested the water before the legislation went into act, and then we also tested again this year. So it's the third year that we've been testing the water to keep tabs on it.
Can I make a suggestion? In the interest of time, if we these things going to drag on, I feel like this stuff is table stakes in a lot of cases, and it's going to be driven by a philosophy, which is that I was on the board. I was one of the people who said, by the way, we should, and Ned blames me for us being in this predicament because I said, we ought to have a plan. That's why we're here tonight. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut. What I don't want to do is spend $1.2 million on tile to put it down because we need new tile. Oh, by the way, water's not drinkable. Or we need to fix the electrical because we're getting brownouts. The kids can't actually learn. And so we're going to pick up all the stuff that we just did. And this is why, because I've been on this board for too long. And this is what happens. We would keep doing stuff. And it was oh, but by the way, the buildings are really old. And so all the stuff that we just did, we're going to throw it away when we actually make the fix we need to do. So I think I think a lot of these things, the air conditioning, I agree, is probably a separate conversation because that's really it's an educational thing, and I think it's sort of a nice to have. We can talk about it. But the other stuff is in the context of, look, if we're going to fix this stuff, let's fix it so that we can actually make the investments that we're not going to then throw away at some point 3 years later.
I would agree completely, and maybe I was coming at it from a different direction. We can talk about air conditioning separately, but to me, this list doesn't include everything it needs to. To me, electrical and plumbing should be on there. Those are basic, and to do anything, cosmetic, ADA accessible, health, life, safety, and not fix those, and then have to go back and rip out walls to put the electrical in or the plumbing, seems nutty. So I don't know, but I'm wondering if we shouldn't at least add in electrical capacity sufficient to power what we're using today, let alone what we might use in the future. And maybe that comes along if we do a new HVAC system, I don't know. And the other one is the water. Why are we dealing with the possibility that we don't have great water in some of these schools? It shouldn't even be an issue in today's world.
Okay, so is it safe to, well, I don't want to get bogged down into the minutiae here either, but there's a certain amount of safety that how can we put it in the bucket of?
Well, we should ask if anybody has any issues with any of these being included.
Right, it sounds like the last.
Go ahead, Scott.
I think the way that I would approach it, because this is a modeling exercise, what we're using to model based off of, I think a safe assumption to model off of is understanding what is normal. this is what the baseline looks like if this is just our procedure going forward into the future, independent of doing a build out or some construction. And stuff that's been listed in here, as I think is reasonable to expect, is the normal operating things that you would do from. I agree that the air conditioning probably is an addendum to that. That may not necessarily turn over. Is this something that we should do or do not do? But I think baseline as a modeling perspective could be what it would look like if we were to operate as if we have it going forward. That's my two thoughts.
Anybody want to summarize that?
Is it appropriate to think that perhaps we create a separate box, to Don's point, down after maybe HVAC AC updates exclusive of AC? That would be the water and electrical issue. I personally think I'm very comfortable with the health, life safety items, ADA accessibility, cosmetic updates, safety and security enhancements, and HVAC updates, i.e. fix the buildings we have now that we decide to keep on the basic infrastructure is the way I see that list. That's my short summary. I think Don raises an interesting point, as does Matt, that we would want to make sure that we knew what the cost was to try to get the electrical supporting what we're doing and clean potable water where we felt more comfortable with it when we have these old pipes. And maybe we don't have an issue, but maybe the core team can help us understand that better as a separate line item. And then HVAC with air conditioning, I agree, I need to see that put against other things that affect outcomes for kids. I mean, that's a big dollar number, and I want to see how that contrasts with other ways where we get outcomes. So I would think the last box and the electrical and water inserted box would be separate from what I would say would be the baseline.
And I'd like to see the HVAC piece broken out per building, because the number, I was just asking Brad, so it's about 11.3 to 11.5 differential between just HVAC updates and HVAC with AC. But that, for instance, includes if you put AC throughout Skokie. So if you take Skokie, so if we have it broken down by building, because I'm going back to that meeting we had at the end of last year, where, and maybe those numbers have changed, where they showed per building what it was going to cost to do the HVAC system, a new HVAC system without AC, and then the add-on cost for AC. And in some of those buildings, it was not a lot, like a few $100,000, I thought. Maybe I'm remembering.
I've got it here.
Okay, go ahead.
So we've got Skokie's, let's see. This is for the 15.3 million. Skokie is the biggest piece of that, I believe. It's 5.3 million.
So
5.4 million. 2.4 for Greeley.
Wait, sorry, 2.4 is the incremental above just doing the heating, or is that total?
That's the air conditioning.
So 5.4 for Skokie.
This may be better exercising to
Yeah.
come back with some
We can,
options.
we can certainly
Maybe
bring
just
back.
the details
We do
right
have
now.
the details. But
And the decision tree of which direction we want to go by schools helps these numbers then become more realistic to what we want to know. You're right, it's got to be by building. I mean, Skokie costs a lot to upgrade, which is one reason why maybe it doesn't make sense to do that.
But I guess where I'm coming, we should have this discussion, because to me, air conditioning is a life safety issue. I would put it in there, I would put it in baseline. I think, somebody asked me, what do you mean do most other districts around here have schools that are not air conditioned, or are we like the only one?
I would actually love to see if maybe the core team or staff could go and look at schools in some radius that makes sense.
I hear that, but what does it matter if another school has it or not?
I think
Is that gonna,
it's not.
is that?
So the question I asked, the second part of my question was going to be, is there any research that affects outcomes? But my thought is if the public and private schools in this area some distance from here. If 95% of them have 100% of their square footage air conditioned, that's an interesting data point to know, because it's the market, if you will, the same.
I guess
That's
I would
amazing.
ask, what percentage of the households in this community have air conditioning, and what's the percent that don't have it? I mean, to me, okay, fair enough, but to me, air conditioning is one of those things where when you see the kids with red cheeks and at 1 o'clock in the afternoon who cannot keep their heads up because it's so hot.
I'm not saying I wouldn't vote for it, but for $10 to $15 million, I think I want to see how it breaks out. For what I understand is 10 to 15 days a year.
But I do think, let's review the data we do have. So we've calculated that it's roughly 10% of the learning days that are affected by temperatures beyond the comfort range, right? Now, it was just looking at summer. I wasn't looking at uncomfortable days in the winter that we might have because of the heating system. But that we're talking about AC here, so fair enough. Roughly 10% of the days, learning teaching days, are affected by temperatures that are beyond what should be ideal for learning. We had data from DLR, I believe, early on, talking about, it wasn't so much temperature-wise, but you guys did a lot about the environment and learning advantages in an environment where temperature and light and all those types of things are the appropriate levels. So I think we have seen a pretty clear link to learning and your environment being at least comfortable, controllable.
Yeah.
And then all of us that are parents have exactly seen what you've seen. Kids that are just wiped out. I don't know how they. Sorry, I'm getting perhaps showing my own experience in this, but I will say, to me, it's time we do this. I mean, the world's only getting warmer. 10%. If you were to say you're going to take your kid out of school for 10% of the days that we're going to teach them, I mean, nobody would go with that. We wouldn't be okay with saying you're just arbitrarily going to take every child out of school for 10% of their learning days.
So we're not going to decide it here. I just want to make sure that we're clear on what you want us to move forward on, because this is a great conversation. We do need to have it in.
I think they want us to decide if that's part of our baseline or not.
So I guess maybe one question is, and maybe DLR is the best to answer this. If we were to say we want to put HVAC, or this air conditioning issue, temperature control, as a baseline, can you carve out that this is how much it's going to cost per school to have that? Can we separate it out so we can say this is what it looks like if we don't do it, this is what it looks like if we do it, so you can isolate those costs? Can you do that given, I don't know, construction and timing and walls you have to take down and all that stuff? Is that an easy number to kind of estimate? Okay, so we can look at it and say, really, it's going to cost this much to upgrade and have fully, so we have the information. So it's just a matter of coming up with the data and saying this is what it's going to cost. So we can put it in the baseline, and if people look at it and say, we can just make a decision, right? We either want to spend it or we don't want to spend it, right?
Yeah, I guess I thought, yes, maybe I misunderstood what we were trying to do, or I thought we were trying to get a complete set of baseline items, and I would argue that should go into it.
Okay, so, but as long as we have a separate cost, then we can go further down the road and decide, I guess. If people just balk at the idea that it's too expensive, we can discuss that when we get to it.
Right, so I guess it sounds like
Yeah,
it's not in the baseline. There's not a majority support to put air conditioning in the baseline, but that will be a separate item that we'll continue to have a cost associated with.
I mean, I would put it in the baseline.
Can I just insert one thing, because I think you guys talk about it's cost or not cost, and I'm going to triangulate it a second, which is that we already got a message from the community about this, which is it's not just finance, which is, what does it mean? Right? Is it important that these kids are in comfort for 180 days a year? Maybe it'll make them tougher if they sit and eat. I mean, I don't, like, there's some, and that is the part that's why I don't think this is for me. It's not really a cost question.
Okay.
I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing, hey, we could have a new school with air conditioning and $15 million, but we don't want to do that. We want to do something that's right for the community. And if it's right for the community to have air conditioning for the kids, so that they're in school in comfort for 180 days a year, like that's what we should think about.
Right. And
It's not, I don't think this is just a cost question.
But I think in the interest of moving forward and getting decisions made, there's not a lot of new data here. I mean, we've heard the arguments in favor of air conditioning. We have the numbers. I think I really feel like we should probably, and if there's a huge community backlash to whatever decision, we sort of start with as to whether it's going to be in there, we'll hear about it, I'm sure. But to me, we should be working with the baseline number and not keep having this component that we pull out, because just in case. And by the way, if you're going to go in and do HVAC updates, safety and security enhancements, I can't imagine that you would say, well, we're going to put air conditioning off, because unless there's a way that you can then add it on easily without redoing the whole systems, maybe there is, 2 years down the line or something. Why on earth would you put new HVAC systems into these buildings and not have air conditioning? I mean, I don't know what the incremental is going to end up being overall. Something less than 11, because we're going to probably take Skokie out of the mix. I mean, that's just insanity to me. I mean, why would you not do this in a situation where you're going to update the schools? You wouldn't put HVAC into it.
Well, as long as we know what it costs, not that it comes down to that, but as long as for the people who are, if we're going to look at it that way, if that's a way to look at it, as long as we know what it is, we can add it in or subtract it, right? So, okay. So, I'd say we put it in baseline, and then we have a number, and we can subtract it out if we want to subtract it out. Okay.
But the core team should move forward with the assumption that that is part of the baseline.
Yeah. So, and what about any of these other things? So if we add electrical to it, and we add the potable pipes.
You want the domestic water pipes.
Yep. And electricity. And then is there anything else that is hanging out there that you think we should think about and putting in baseline, or is this in it?
That was the list we were working on. Okay. Other those were two.
All right, so do we have majority consensus on this list of baseline assumptions, putting air conditioning in as a baseline on the rest of the items?
I'm good.
Do you guys agree with my
I'm good with
adding in electrical and piping, or no?
I'm good with it.
I agree with it, subject to I want to see what the numbers are, and in all of it, for me, the only thing is how does all of it move outcomes for kids? So all of it is a play against one another. That's where I'm coming down. So when we get to the bottom, all of those pieces, I mean, I can't imagine that it's not worthwhile doing, but that's my comment. So that's why I'm coming from that position.
Okay, Jennifer?
Yeah, the outcome and the connection, but I'm a proponent of air conditioning, and I think it definitely needs to be part of baseline.
Okay.
And thermal control.
Are you good with our list, Matt, or do you have, we're on board? Okay, Dawn, you agreeing with baseline? Scott, you're agreeing with baseline? Well,
I think once again, this is a modeling exercise. So I think I've ultimately at the end of the day is what's going to have to be needed in any model that we run, and there's going to need to be funded and paid for. Just making sure that whatever we decide, if we end up deciding at the end of all of this master plan and that the baseline is what we have to do, well, then we need that our fund structure basically supports that.
okay,
If our fund structure supports the baseline, that I'm fine with that model. So I think it really comes down to really what the will of the community is and what they're willing to spend across the different options that we have from a tax basis standpoint.
Okay, so for modeling purposes, you're good with putting air conditioning into the baseline? Yeah.
I am for, yeah.
Is this modeling, or is this giving the core team direction?
We're giving them direction to come up with, so we can further hone in on this plan. So we're going to keep AC in there.
And we're going to add electric upgrades and water pipes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got,
Okay, I'm moving forward with that.
we're good on that one. Okay, so now we have to discuss the school enrollment.
I'll take it for this one.
I'll let you take it. Okay, good.
This one gets a little tricky out of all of them because it's not really necessarily scientific, and there is Just going to be at the bottom base of this is going to be a board direction and a judgment call. So we are building currently all of our concepts on the 2018-19 school enrollment projections, which impacts how much square footage each school would need to have for the various models. Impacts, also kind of the long-term enrollment viability of each option when we look at how many students each of the schools can educate. So what we've heard from the board and through this process is we want to make sure that whatever plan we land on has some enrollment range that it can accommodate over time. We look back at our historical figures, we look back at hearing from former board members who were here 30-some years ago, looking at similar problems and recognizing that in the long view is helpful to actually have this long-term perspective to make sure we have room for kids should the enrollment rebound. So we need to determine, what the core team would like is to determine to what degree we want to account for the enrollment volatility. One way to do this too practically that we recommend and we talked about is that we don't build instructional space or classroom space at each of the schools to hold the additional enrollment. We provide infrastructure, so if we ever do need to do additions or add extra classroom space, that can be done. But you maximize kind of the common spaces. So for instance, a gym or a cafeteria would be not built upon the enrollment of 18-19, but it would include whatever variance the board provides direction on this evening, if that makes sense. That's what you would do basically, is impact the square footage of those common spaces. To try to get some context around this, there isn't a formula or agreed upon industry kind of foundation to come up with what the enrollment projection should be as far as what you want to build for. So what we did do is we looked back at the enrollment, if you can project that, Lance, the board has this. We took when Skokie had reopened, we were back to 5 schools in the year 2000, and we looked back through last year, so 2000 to 2016, we looked at each of our schools over that time period, identified their maximum enrollment, the minimum enrollment, their average enrollment. We have the 18-19 projection for each of the schools. And then according to that projection, we did a variance from the max and we did a variance from the average. And then Steve also wanted to be highly scientific and asked for some standard deviation numbers. So that's one standard deviation amount. So essentially looking at this, you can see it varies by school and it varies over time. And there's no science necessarily to this other than giving us a number that we can move forward with. If you look at the variance from the average, is what we originally did, it looked to be about 20% enrollment was an increase in enrollment would be a safe threshold to build for off of the 18-19 projections. But again, this is up for board discussion as far as what investment you want us to make in our common spaces in our schools to account for increased enrollment over time.
If we're talking about the common spaces only, I would go on the high end because God forbid we do this and then have to do it again in 10 years or 15 years because our gym is too small or our cafeteria is too small.
So that would be 25%.
Yeah, something like that.
But that's the variance from the max from the 18-19 projections.
I was thinking 20 to 25.
It's 20
range.
If we start getting that high, I'm looking back at history and I'm thinking about all the people who are kind enough to share their perspective of previous years. If we get that high, do we start getting back into a discussion about reopening Skokie, if that's what we've shot? I mean, at some point, do you need to say the town cycles in its population like this, and we need to keep the safety valve open, and instead of spending a lot of extra money in each of these schools, I mean, the question is how much it would cost, but if 25% could start making a fairly big number, I'm thinking, and are you better off to say in 10 or 15 years, you would say the last 5 years we might be a little tight, but then we would open the south side of Skokie again like we did 25 years ago. And that's essentially a free option by keeping that school available to use in 10 or 15 years if you knew that you needed it. I guess what I'm looking at is if the projections we feel relatively confident with for the next 10 years, give ourselves a smaller margin than that. And certainly our teachers have done a superb job operating when things have been a little different than projection. Witness what they've managed at Crow Island the last couple of years.
That's a good point. The one thing that I want to just throw out there, one of the things that I'm going to ask to have explored is if we end up looking at making major renovations to Washburn, decommissioning both Washburn and Skokie or tearing them down and putting up a new building in place, whether it causes 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or just 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorry, whether it's 3 through 8, 4 through 8, or 5, 6, 7, 8. Basically, I want the cost difference between renovating Washburn to hold those grades and building a whole new building to hold those grades. It may be completely different and not worth considering, but in that scenario, if we're actually putting up a new structure, I don't know that we can necessarily assume that we can reopen Skokie or Washburn because we probably have to take them down. The only way I think that would work would be to build the new building in the middle of the two, like Sunset Ridge did, in the open space, and then when you're done, you take those down, and those become your fields and play areas. This is just a wild thought. It may be completely untenable. I'm just saying, if you're going to explore that option at all, you don't then have the ability to go back and reopen Skokie at some point.
Right.
And by the way, one little comment. I actually think your point is very well taken, and I agree. But at that point, the cost of reopening Skokie and updating Skokie and doing will be significant. It was significant last time they did it, and we're going to be talking about it even more in the future. Because I don't think we're talking about, if we decommission Skokie, we're not going to update Skokie at this point in time. So I don't know what it would cost down the line to do that, would be my only thought. It's hard to predict what the cost would be to reopen Skokie and bring it up to date 20 years down the line.
Right, I guess I would argue that you would only be doing that if you knew you needed to do it, which would be a great situation for the town, because clearly a lot of people would have been buying houses here to have kids to fill the schools.
But I guess, yes. And again, it's going to come down to numbers, as you said. But if it's a more efficient use of funds to put the space in up front than it is to do it at the back end, is my only thought.
Here's what we talked about just as a query. So even in the maintain option, which is at the one end of the continuum in this project, we are looking at adding either cafeterias or lunchrooms or gym space. And so what size should we account for that? Knowing what DLR shared with us, our architects has shared, is that it's more difficult to renovate larger spaces over time than it is to add classroom or instructional spaces. So if you want to, as far as economy of scale, and as you go in and you're doing renovation work anyway, to what degree do you want to invest so that you, yes, may have challenges over time with enrollment in other ways, but those common spaces are wide or large enough to accommodate some enrollment volatility, which we clearly have seen over time in the district.
Let me ask this question, maybe DLRs can comment. So we're talking about adding to the common spaces. So if we have let's say Greeley has 300 kids in it. So if the population grows by 10%, if I'm doing the math right, that's 30 more kids, right? And if it goes up 20%, that's 60 more kids. So I'm not really sure. Do you have a sense of magnitude? Like, how much does it really cost to add on to a common space for 30 more kids versus 60 more kids? I don't have a sense. Is the incremental cost like?
It's not that tremendous the cost. If you think about free-size cafeteria, around 23 or 24 square feet per student, a kitchenette roughly half of that. So let's say that's 11 or 12. The incremental increase in size is the sum of those two times the number of students. So I can do some quick math for you and just tell you the difference. It's not significant. Where it becomes the biggest challenge is always gymnasium spaces, cafeteria spaces, common spaces that typically get nested in the middle of buildings and not added to the end of the building. And so the functionality is improved and the adjacencies are improved. adding of other educational spaces in the future can be readily done at different points in the building and still have easy access to those centralized services. It's really about internalizing those additions in targeted locations and putting that investment in first, and then adding on to the educational spaces as the enrollment continues to grow.
So if we look at modeling this, so that we don't get our undies in a bundle over the real minutia, is there really that much difference between considering 15% or 10% and 20%? And in other words, if we were to choose 15%, is that a good number to work with?
And I have a follow-on question to that.
The cost differential isn't huge, wouldn't it be better to do now thinking erring more towards 25%? Then when I first went down, I wrote down in my notes 20%.
And so,
It's roughly 1,100 square feet to go from 30 to 60 students in a cafeteria.
1,100 square feet.
125 for a refill.
105 in construction costs.
100,000.
467,000 to do difference between, is that 10 and 20?
is this so conceptual that you don't know where you think you would put it in each school? I mean, we're only talking, if we're talking about neighborhood schools plus a Washburn version, we're only talking 4 schools. Do you have some sense that in some schools it's almost insignificant cost, but in some schools going from 15% to 25% would just really be expensive because you're running into an auditorium or something?
It'd be expensive here.
I mean, you see what I'm trying to say is, I mean, we're only dealing with 4 schools. Can we figure that out for sensitivity?
Probably not very accurately tonight, but yes, we can.
Not tonight. No, I don't need tonight. I'm here for the next meeting. That would help me. As opposed to just giving just some number. If the last 2% cost a lot more money, I would care about that. But it's not a huge dollar amount, to your point, incrementally, to give yourself a little extra room.
Okay, so that was clear as mud now.
Yeah, right, because I mean, if we're trying to, here's the piece, if we're gonna narrow, if one of the next conversation that we're gonna have here is we're narrowing the concepts further, the more square footage you add, that test fit that you recall is gonna be impacted. So that also, when we look at the viability of these different concepts, I know we're looking at incremental cost, but we also, quite frankly, need to look at the square footage impact this has on these concepts. If we're looking at K3, K4, or K5.
Can we say we support the concept of increasing cores, and could we get back an alternate A and B kind of thing for what it would be of 10% versus 25%?
So the answer is always yes, but we're just looking to focus the work of the court as much as possible and you're comfortable with. So not, trying to shoehorn you into decision here, but the more direction you can provide, the better data and information we can provide you as a board and the community to help make decisions.
So, I just have a question about the order, because if Harvard Woods is going to be K through 5, I think then 15%, 20%, 25%, the variable becomes a pretty important discussion, because this school is landlocked and this school doesn't have a cafeteria at all. I think Carlin has a very small one in the lower level and Greeley has one on the first floor. So I'm just wondering if we flip the order.
Kirby made a point last night with Krista and I with the core team to just understand a little bit of the evolution, which was very insightful, I thought. And she was saying that, when we needed more space last time, Skokie was reopened and we kind of put 4 or 5 there because, 5, 6 there, because that's where they fit. And our schools have evolved somewhat because of where kids fit. If we're going to go through this whole process and redo our buildings, let's not put ourselves into a situation where we're going to have to, we may find that financially we have to do that. But if we don't have to do it financially, let's not force ourselves into a grade level model simply because that's where the kids are going to fit. If we truly think that K-5 is the best model, or K-4, or K-3, wherever they end up with that, let's plan such that that's how we can keep our schools long-term, and not be in a situation, well, if it gets too big, we'll go back and we'll put some of the kids back in a different building. Let's figure out what we want from an educational perspective, and then let's plan around that too. We can never be 100% certain, I get it. But I guess I would err on the side of saying, if we come up with a model we think is truly the best, let's build around that and give ourselves enough growth room in there that we can keep that under, hopefully 75% or 80% of the scenarios we would come up with. I'm not discounting the fact that I know there's a cost factor to this. We got to look at the numbers, but to me that kind of struck me when you said that. Let's think about what we actually want for our kids, not just where we're going to be able to fit our kids.
Sorry, so what's the question?
What is the, off of the 18-19 projections for our enrollment, which is currently all of the square footage and test bits are built off of that. What is the board provide direction and a threshold, an increase for common space square footage that we can build our models going forward with to make sure we have enough long-term vision for enrollment rebounding that has been referred to quite a bit.
Okay, so this is supposed to be a 30-year investment. That's how we're looking at it, that's how we're financing it. So when we think about it through that lens, we would be stupid to not think about at least the average. And a standard deviation, that's what the math says above that. That's a math question.
So average, so what it is average plus standard
average
deviation?
Plus standard deviation, you're gonna have that for sure in the school in the next 30 years. That's what the math says. If we don't wanna do that, we wanna save the money, because I don't know why we're gonna end up with a Frankenstein building or something. And that board's gonna be like, I can't believe those guys didn't do this. But that would be the thought. And if the incremental cost, like you're already building, it's not gonna be $400 a square foot. It's gonna be a lot less than that because you're already building.
So can you do the back of the envelope, man?
Well, we would just with now feel that we'd effort that's the percentage there, we would just convert that to the number of students and add standard deviation, which is already a number of students.
Does everybody agree with the methodology? Anybody have any other comments?
Yeah, I agree with that in the sense that the 18-19 projection, if you look, it's at the trough here in terms of enrollment. So if we heard it loud and clear from the community last meeting, it's going to come back. It's going to come back. I've seen it. You guys all projected it's going to dive, and then it always comes back. And I think we have to build ourselves into at least the average and give ourselves a little bit of cushion. It's a pretty arbitrary exercise we're going through right now. So I think everybody should appreciate that. But if it helps us give guidance to the core team to move on, I'm comfortable with the average plus one standard deviation.
Okay. Anybody else? Scott, do you have a view?
I think that the discussion is long. I'm in agreement that probably needs to have some level of average that looks out with further perspective. So, I think it's the construction that I've built some headroom to make sure that I have room for growth. So I think it's understanding what's that number, and so I think it's reasonable to think about that. So.
Okay, so anybody else? Everybody agree with the concept, the methodology?
I think it's too much, but I'll go along with the board. And I'm not convinced, but I will go along with where we're going.
Okay, Dawn?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we have majority consensus on that point.
What is the percentage running up with that?
We're going to build off the average plus standard deviation, correct? So Hawaiian 381 plus 26. I think that's over here.
Yes.
What's the percent?
Well, it's
Varies by
I have to
school.
calculate. Oh, okay.
It varies by school because the standard deviation is a little bit different by school.
Okay, moving along. So now we've got the neighborhood.
Sorry, you're gonna go off the average plus standard deviation, not current enrollment plus standard deviation.
Correct, that's what I heard.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Neighborhood school concept. We've got A, B, and C. Oh, we don't?
It's your annotated version.
Oh, okay, so we've got, the models are, we've got a K-3 school, which means a 4 through 8 school. We have a K through 4, and then a 5-8, and we have a K-5 and a 6-8. So there's 3 avenues that fit within the neighborhood concept construct. So the question is, can we focus that down for the core team so that they can focus on 1 or 2 of those? That's the next question. So now, maybe Jennifer, can you talk to the, I know the K5, 6, 8 model is very attractive, but through the core team discussions, is there, I mean, I think that that's pretty difficult to do, but I don't know that that's maybe too comment or.
Yeah, and I would ask Jason and Bonnie to jump in. K through 5 is tricky because each school is in a neighborhood and has different landlocked scenarios, and also there are current conditions. So for Hubbard Woods to be K through 5, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, wouldn't it cost 75% roughly, if I remember this correctly, of what it would cost to build a new school? I mean, it would be renovating, moving things, and then that's, before you get to that, also the traffic flow. K through 5, the population, the traffic, the pickup, we would probably want to reconfigure some of the streets, one-way, two-way. And then thirdly, it's expensive. And I think that 4 through 8, new space, you have an opportunity to create future-ready space for your older learners, and then you can bring it back into the early community schools, K through 3. But K through 5 is a great idea. I don't think I'm the only person here who's had children attend a K through 5 school or have attended one myself, but I think that the viability in this community with where our schools are right now, Greeley, Crow Island, and Hubbard Woods, it's really challenging.
A lot of the conversation, so there was no, as far as having our students in a school, this has been a model that's been employed in this district before, it's not new. Having students attend an elementary school, K through 5, is a positive experience, and we can go to more traditional middle school, 6 through 8, so it's not a question of that. I think what the 2 challenges the core team had when looking at it through this analytical lens was, one, just the level, you know, we've heard this before, the level of variance and the lot size essentially we have, and what would need to happen to renovate. Is it, at one point, does it make more sense to rebuild then, and what's the cost structure to that? And I think that's what Jennifer was getting to. The other piece too is we're looking for, one of our main pillars of this whole process is looking at enrollment management over time. And it maximizes basically on the 18-19 projection, which is, we just recognized the lower projection of our history. It does build this model where there isn't much room to grow if our enrollment does start to rebound. So as far as an enrollment volatility standpoint, there are some limitations. That were some of the key indicators as to why it was, in addition to cost, why it was a challenge for the community.
So,
I'm just thinking.
okay. Thoughts? Jennifer?
It's not a possibility.
Well, that's what we need to agree or disagree.
I've loved this idea for a long time. The idea of K through 5 really appeals, but what I'm hearing you say is, at Hubbard Woods, it's a 75% cost to make this K-5. At that point, why are we keeping it?
We should clarify that. Let's clarify that.
So, is this on? Okay. The build new versus renovate comparison is an attempt to create an apples-to-apples scenario in a repair versus a replace. The large lever here is the modernization or future-ready application of K5 and its implication to this site in particular because of its geometric shape. It's a little bit kind of J-shaped, if you will, and the position of available land currently to build. And so the point was made earlier about enrollment volatility and the opportunity we can increase the core sizes of this facility to support an increased enrollment, but to provide the same access to the modernized spaces and things like that would start to be a challenge if we needed to add more classrooms in the future. So if we anticipate the largest enrollment in the demographic projections as the peak, I think K-5 at Hubbard Woods is attainable. I think the challenge comes with future influx of movements of other students over time and adding more classrooms on in the future in its current condition. Now, it's also worth noting that if the building were shaped differently and the site had some other room to grow, like was talked about, maybe some road work or things like that, then obviously those are different circumstances that would have to be analyzed.
I guess I think whatever option we end up, we are going to have to work within our budget. And I don't think it's going to be a dream budget. I think it's going to be, we have X amount and we're going to have to figure out how we want to use X amount and we're not going to get everything done. So maybe I'm wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if we aren't looking at having to make some tougher choices when we get down the line to actually designing this process. To me, where I would most like to see space made into an increase in space, modernization of space, call it future ready, although I feel like that term's getting kind of tired, but whatever, in the older levels. So 5, 6, 7, 8, those kids, to me, that is where I think you get the most bang for your buck with doing future ready type changes. So the other challenge I see is if you move 5 down, then you're having to do more of that within the 3 schools, which is, I would think, necessarily going to be more expensive than doing it in whatever building you put your older kids into. So I guess what I'm saying, I'm countering my own point. I guess I see an advantage to keeping the neighborhood schools smaller, whether it's K4 or K3, so that hopefully you can do more of those enhancements for the older kids in whatever building you're going to put them in.
Okay.
And more grade levels get the advantage of that.
Okay, so Matt, it sounds like you're thinking that K5 is not a good idea. Is that a safe?
I'm listening to repeating back what you're saying, so yes.
Okay. No, I just want to, does anybody?
I would very much want to try to see how to make K5 work, including ripping down a piece of the school and building a piece of it brand new. That was 2 stories. And maybe the core teams looked at those numbers.
And I'm asking this respectfully, I'm asking this very respectfully, why? In terms of, do you think that 6, 7, and 8 as a grouping developmentally makes more sense? Or is it the community school model?
Both.
Okay.
I mean, I think both are very much in part for me. I really have seen the value of my kids coming to the smaller school. This school is old. It's site constrained. I get it. I understand all that. And maybe the core team has been all through it. We know probably there needs to be almost a brand new gym at Crow Island, and that's sort of a special site. I get it. It's got its own issues. It really has special site issues. This site has special site issues. If there is a way to be able to get that K through 5 here, I guess to Don's question, the question I would ask is, we have limited money. Do we know which grades are better to invest more future-ready space into for teaching and learning? If we have limited dollars, is it better to invest it in 7th grade or in 3rd grade?
And the core team has talked about that. That's part of the iteration. They'll come back next board meeting once we've left here with narrow concepts. We'll be able to come back and say, here's where we would prioritize modernization of space for teaching and learning impact. We talked about
that would influence some of my thinking on that, because I would have thought not being an educator, that earlier in the foundation, getting it better would be more important.
Conversation so far have been investing in the more modernized spaces in the older levels makes more sense too, as far as where students are also then heading off to in high school, and some of the team structure, the interdisciplinary structure at the middle school. But again, there's more work for the core team to prioritize that, so I don't want to get ahead of ourselves there.
And I just want to throw out to the board philosophically, if we're doing K3 or K4 in the community schools, and it's 4-8 or 5-8 in one school that's newly built, is there a way or to envision that that school will reflect a community school feeling? Because it won't be having a transition from Skokie to Washburn. It can be led and with cross-curriculum study, it could have a middle school wing, it could have a junior high side. I mean, but it could still feel like one community. It could have a smaller school feeling than perhaps Skokie and Washburn do.
I mean, simplistically, my math is about 200 kids per grade. 4 grades is 800 kids. That's just a bigger school.
No, it is. I'm just saying.
That's part of my, when we went on the board trips, the trips Trish told us to go on to, the thing they pounded into our heads in California was no school bigger than 500 kids. And that was a real thing they said was part of their secret. And that's part of my issue is I think the neighborhood schools, K through 5, are still less than 500 under the models I've seen. And maybe I'm wrong. And maybe it's too expensive to Matt's point. But I really like smaller if it's possible.
That wasn't my point, just to be clear. I'm listening, that's what I'm hearing you guys say. If you want to do K5,
We need to decide. Do we want the core team to look at the 3 configurations, or do we want to? Can we narrow it down so that they can focus their time and energy? That's the question. So, do you want the core team to spend time talking to an empty chair? Can we provide any narrowed focus to the core team, or do we need them to go down the paths of all 3 grade configurations? So that's the question.
K5 is how many kids? If using that.
So I don't have the breakout of each school because I use 200 as a grade across the district as a rough number.
Yeah, we're not going to be over that number.
I'm just,
No, we're not going to be over.
not 500. So
400.
I personally don't know that I add much value to this. So if you're asking for direction, I think this is an educational thing. It's a cost thing. I don't think I can personally say this is the right way.
I think that, we'll go ahead and Steve.
Personally, I don't know enough to eliminate something right now. From this conversation, my direction to the core team, if it were just me, I'd say continue to explore those options. As painful as it might be, I just don't know enough from what I've heard.
In terms of cost or fits? I'm just
in
saying for the core
terms
team.
of educational impact, in terms of cost, I don't know enough personally to say, let's kill that K-5. I just don't. And I don't know how much extra burden that puts on the core team.
No,
I
was trying to think of what else, and I mean, please jump in, but what else?
When we come back, obviously the big question is then what does the educational programming, how does it align with the instructional space? And if we're renovating these spaces, and I think the next question is the value the board puts on modernizing learning spaces. But if we're renovating these spaces to add educational value and impact, we will go through that exercise and look at the size of the schools and a little bit of how we can design them in a way that helps promote our progressive values and helps make sure that students have a sense of community, that the teachers have appropriate collaborative partners. That's the sort of work we continue to go through. The real question was not an educational question. I think we started off saying there's benefit to a K-5, 6-8. It's not that. It's just knowing what you know about the constraints we have in that model right now, more so with an enrollment than anything. Is it something you still want to pursue at this time? And again, sounds like you might be at a point where you still want to pursue that. And The core team is used to working and looking at a lot of different options. We'll continue to do that. But we were just, there were some conversations that it was.
But am I hearing correctly from Jennifer, just what you're saying, and also from other meetings, that the core team's kind of already made this call. Not that it's their call to make, but I think we've asked them to do a job, which is evaluate these options. Am I hearing you correctly, where they've kind of said, K-5 doesn't work for our district? And are we saying to them, we don't like your answer, go back and look at it again? Or are we saying to them that we need more data as around it? Because I'm just listening to how much you're pushing back on this, and you don't tend to do that very much. It sounds like you've explored this as a group in a lot of ways. I know there's a lot of community interest in it, so I know you didn't just dismiss it at hand. And if what you're saying is we've looked at this and we don't think it is a viable answer for this community, I guess saying go back to the drawing board because we don't like your answer, to me we charge them with looking at the data and giving us their best recommendations. And if you're giving us a recommendation that we don't think K-5 is the right answer, then I think we have to listen to that. And I'm one who, like Matt, in an idealistic way, I kind of like the K-5 option, but if what you're saying is we looked at it and it really doesn't work, I don't think it's right for me to then say, well, I don't like your answer, go back and look at it a different way. Unless we really think there's additional data that they haven't considered that we should be hearing about.
We're not trying to make this any more challenging. There's 3 areas we looked at, right? We looked at enrollment, facilities, and vision for teaching and learning. It's not a vision for teaching and learning issue. It's not a facility issue. As we said, anything's possible. We can make it work. It's more of a, we're not even talking cost at this moment. We're saying more of an enrollment issue than anything as far as long-term viability and then the size of the school that we need to have. The board at this time is saying keep it on the table and continue to pursue it, knowing the challenges we have. Again, we don't want to cycle, and we're not trying to do that. If there was a clean answer to move forward, we can move forward. If not, then we continue investigating all three options.
I would ask that you bring K-5 back, please. And I understand, and I appreciate the extra effort.
Then can I ask the board, and we can certainly think about this, some sort of clear questions of what you want to see about K through 5.
Yeah. What we'll do at the end of this conversation is we have that analysis matrix that talks about all these key areas, and I think we'll be able to have enough information from that analysis that we provided to the board this evening, kind of that framework to be able to show distinguishable differences between these options for further consideration. So we will do as much as we can by May 22nd. Okay. If not, then we'll finish that up at the June board meeting.
Okay, so it sounds like what we're going to do is keep it there until we get the matrix.
And I think another point to make here is we are now abandoning the titles maintain, enhance, and transform. We are going to call these options K3, K4, K5, and just move it from that point, because it sounds like at this point there's a lot of levers that we want to look at, including how much future ready space, what the enrollment capacity will be, of those facilities. So we'll now move forward to the next iteration of this process.
Again, I just also want to say I'm also very focused on the second part of that. So how are you going to structure the remaining grades? In what building, and in new versus renovated versus, to me, I want to make sure that has equal emphasis. And I want to understand that part of it.
I've never had a lot to think about renovation versus new, especially for that Skokie Washburn campus, whatever grade levels it ends up serving.
Okay, so the majority says we're going to keep all 3 going until we have a chance to look at the matrix that hopefully the core team will be able to fill in over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, as much as we can. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so everybody's good with that?
I'm not sure it's the majority, but if we have enough board members that want to see it, then I think we should explore it. But I actually don't know that it is the majority.
Okay, well, is it or not? Majority, yes, no?
I abstain. I don't have a strong opinion, so.
Okay. Anybody?
I don't feel like.
Sounds like.
I didn't hear a
I think you need to leave it
definitive.
because it seems like we can't decide.
comment from the core team, this is not something we should move. I didn't hear that. That's, I think, how you interpreted some of that, which is,
My only question is,
maybe I missed it.
my only question is, are we in agreement right now of keeping all three of these grade configurations
On the table,
document? I'm just doing it for the record, so that's the
I am fine with that as well, and we can break out cost and models and look at it more closely.
I just don't want to be making an assumption that this is what we're going to do. So I just want everybody to agree that this is what we're doing. Because I don't want to make assumptions. All right, last area is modernizing learning spaces. Right? Okay, so much has been shared regarding learning spaces that are built today based on student teacher experience and research. Is modernizing learning spaces important in the educational master facility plan? So we need to determine if we want to modernize our spaces to make them more conducive to group learning and differentiation and more, I don't know.
I mean, this is just again, this is not to use Scott's term, a binary decision. Either it's all in or not. But it's a matter of, if you recall, maintain really doesn't have future ready as it was introduced, doesn't have future ready or modernized learning spaces involved in that from the original introduction. So this was something important when we met as a core team with the community members last night. The lasting remarks was that we would be very helpful to know from the board's perspective the value placed on making sure that there are some modernized learning spaces in this plan. And the core team will then go back and help determine how to prioritize what that might look like.
Does this include technology? This is including breakout spaces, line of sight?
Lighting, electric, acoustics, configuration, outdoor space, physical, access, circulation, all of that. Trisha, I think
So furniture is not in that.
well, furniture would be part of that too.
You didn't list it, that's why I was asking.
Yes, furniture, storage, furniture, but yeah. But as far as a construction facility piece, that's right. That's obviously more of the materials we go into as well, but that would be
Well,
part
we
of the
get to
cost
spending money.
and the
right?
ultimate cost.
So do we have ways to be able to figure out, for instance, at different grades, where this has more impact?
Yes, we'll be able to prioritize where we would want to invest.
So for instance, one grade might just be furniture, but another grade might be more access to space changes, as an example, and furniture.
Right, and obviously we want to look at this holistically too, right? If we're disrupting some space to such a degree to accomplish even some of the baseline pieces, we want to look to see what more we do, right?
But I'm thinking about New Trier didn't renovate the whole school. They renovated about a third of one of their campuses. And a lot of their other classrooms remain the same. So I'm just trying to figure out how it would actually piece into the school.
And that's why, if you recall, the community and the board had asked for all concepts to include future readiness in the cost structure. And the reason that wasn't originally put into the core team is because it extended beyond our debt limit. So all of those concepts do, if we went all in currently as they sit today, extend beyond the debt limit. So that's why we knew we'd have to come back and prioritize some of this for the community and for the board.
Trisha, one of the things I think we've all struggled with as a community is understanding what this really means. What does future really mean, and how do those spaces look? And I don't think we need any more. Well, I guess it's not just about what it is, but what is the benefit? So what is the benefit? And I'm not sure that's measurable, right? Like if you have just pick a grade, 7th grade, that is modern spaces with collaborative, all the things, collaborative sections and the glass walls and features. What is the incremental benefit that you get from that? And there was a community member, and I'm glad I don't remember who it was because I wouldn't want to say their name, but a community member wrote a letter in today that said that there was a Georgetown study that showed in better space or in modern spaces improved performance by something like 11%. Now, I didn't look at the study. I'm talking about a community member's letter, so obviously please don't think, but I'm thinking, is there data out there like that?
There are some.
That we
So
could
if you
pull on?
back in the global perspectives days, early on in this process, a lot of that work and research had been discussed, and if you recall, New Zealand had done some major research on how flexible learning space impacts learning. and there are studies out there, right? We just are always challenged because our demographic doesn't tend to be included in many studies. That, we know there's a lot of research to support a lot of different ideas, but yes, we do have research, we can resurrect some of that, we can add to some of that. I just shared with Nat today, the core team had found, Harvard recently had a study in 2017 about the impact of temperature on learning and outcomes, and so we are happy to come back and share some of those generalizations and some of what we learned even from our site visits as well. We can resurrect some of that as well from talking to teachers and students about some of the renovated spaces and what they were able to have. And even in our own schools, we've had some opportunity for even the cafeteria at Washburn. I know it's on a big renovation, but we do have some teachers who've been using it quite a bit to help support
And I
the
guess,
social program.
not to, this is just me, so others may have a different view. I think I've heard a lot about what teachers could do if they had the space, but what I haven't heard is this, that Ms. T said the so and that, what's the so what? So you can do that. What does that mean for our students as far as they become a better learner, a better collaborator, they do better on tests? I'm trying to understand the impact that these spaces have beyond sort of what they can do. How does that translate into a benefit for our children? And I recognize it's really hard, but that is kind of, I think, where we're looking at. And I know you're going to look at each grade level, but that's part of it too. Is the impact in third grade the same as it is in eighth grade? Is it greater? Is it less? Trying to understand that.
Right, I don't know how nuanced that can be as far as...
I think in addition to that, it's also understanding, can you accomplish the same thing at a fraction of the cost? And so that's where I keep saying, it feels binary sometimes, and I think we have to have a better understanding of that. I look at, if transparency is key, to be able to look out, you don't have to do that as a wall. You can do that with furniture systems. Comes at a fraction of the cost relative to actually building glass windows to be able to see that. So, understanding, can you accomplish the same objective without necessarily doing true full-on modernization, where you can still accomplish the objective of what you're trying to do as the baseline of the so what from a construction standpoint. Does that make sense? Did you hear me?
You broke up a little bit, but I talked to you earlier. So you're looking at a tiered approach to the modernization.
And I agree with him. I know we're making this harder for the core team, but I went back and asked my 8th grader, I went back and I asked my 5th grader, different times they had participated with other classes in the grade on projects. And I heard more examples of what had happened from Hubbard Woods than I heard from Skokie or from Washburn. And maybe it's happening at Skokie and Washburn and my 8th grader's just not telling me, that's totally possible. But what I'm looking for is, how would this work, like Scott's saying, in this layered approach by which grades? Because in the end, we only have so much money available. We have to prioritize one thing against another.
Right, and some of the research we can bring back to talks about how again, space is a tool, right? Instruction is the most important piece, that the teacher, so we haven't said that at all, that is more, that the space is more important than the educator. We just want to get our educators the appropriate tools, and part of the research talks about when there is new space, and even Trier has talked about this, when there is new space, it does help transform sometimes the instructional approach. And so there is a bit of interplay there that also evolves a bit over time. But from what I hear from the board is that, and I think the core team already made this assumption based on some of the cost alone, is that they want a tiered approach to this modernization to help prioritize what it would look like, not only what the teachers could do, but what we're hoping to achieve with our students from this. And we think it's supported by some of the research that's out there that may or may not be completely applicable right to our demographic, but we'll be able to present that nonetheless.
I think there's an element of it is a tiered approach. So I don't think there's anybody in this board that doesn't say we want to modernize our learning spaces. The question is how much and to what cost. And so whereas we might say, pick a grade, at Crow Island we don't need to modernize the spaces, but we're going to take out half the walls anyway to put in the new heating system, well then you might as well. it's the might as well as I kill you, I know when you're in construction, but I'm just saying, if the incremental cost to do it in a particular building because of the other things we're doing, maybe even just baseline things, make it more economically sensible to do it. And I think it could be any buildings, I just picked that as an example. So I think it's almost like a triangular thing, and I don't know if that's something the core committee can even figure out.
We will do the best we can. I just don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but on the rubric or the analysis, before we get too deep in this, we do break down the future-ready prioritization and scope based on updated furniture, infrastructure for technology and equipment, visual transparency, flexibility and connectivity, large common space for gathering and learning, and dedicated hands-on learning spaces and maker spaces. So we do break it out to your point earlier, I think, Nat, you were saying, as to what are these elements, what do they look like in each of these options, and what are the priorities?
And when I looked at this draft, what I didn't see was that by grade or by grade grouping or something. That was why my question was what it was.
Right. So that is what we meant in that very first future ready prioritization and scope would be part of that. So we'll make sure it's included because it wasn't. It's very explicit.
Okay.
So modernized learning spaces should be part of this. So the maintain as it was first introduced option, that there's a reason for this, would it not be something that would be an educational master facility plan the board wants to see. That's what we're just trying to get affirmation on it. Not trying to belabor a point, but that is, I want to make sure there is a desire to make sure that we build that future ready space, the modernization space into this plan.
Are people comfortable? Are you comfortable with that? Are you?
Yes, I'm comfortable with that.
Your eyes are telling me something. Yes, you're good. Okay, Dawn? All right, I'm good. So we've got majority consensus in that. Scott, do you have a view?
I'm sorry, it's my connection, no pun intended. It is hard to hear the discussion. I think what I said is that I am concerned and still think that it's understanding the scale that it is applied is really critical, because I don't think that this is a binary.
The only thing that's binary at this point is, do we want to think about it or do we not want to think about it? That's the only binary.
Let's think about it.
Yeah, I think we're thinking about it. Okay, good. So, all right. So, to summarize, if I do that quickly, we've got consensus on focusing on neighborhood schools. We have a consensus on what we consider to be the baseline,
which is everything on the list plus the electric upgrades and the water pipes.
We have our mathematical equation for dealing with enrollment ebbs and flows.
Correct.
We are keeping the 3 grade configurations in the discussion, and we all agree that we want to think about modernizing learning spaces.
That should be included in the plan, yeah.
Yes, so that's the summary of that. Okay, now, moving on to the next thing. Okay, now we're going to have public comment. After the public comment, the board will have the opportunity for additional discussion if needed, as needed. Then we will give our final direction to the board team. So, Maureen.
There you go. So we have 8 people signed up for public comment. If you will come up to this side of the auditorium, we have Jim Nowacki, Chris Bloom, Alexis Malater, and then I'll call up the next 3 after this.
Thank you for the opportunity. As you may know from a conversation that I had with the superintendent that I think has been relayed to you, I was on the school board here a long time ago, in the 1980s, for 8 years. And we went through a lot of what I'm hearing you discuss tonight. It's wonderful to hear democracy in action and the hard work that you're doing. We appreciate that as a community. When my wife and I first came to Winnetka in 1980, it was in turmoil because the board and superintendent, because of declining enrollment, had raised the idea of shutting down all of neighborhood schools and doing what Glencoe had done, which is gone to a single school, one school. And that created a great controversy. I'm delighted to hear tonight that you understand and appreciate the importance of neighborhood schools. And my first part of what I say tonight is to underscore my support for that position. Neighborhood schools are important to this community. We saw that right from coming here as to what it could do to the community when the issue became a contested one. It was not good for the community. In fact, the caucus determined in the early 1980 period there, right as that was happening, after the school board by one vote decided to stay with the neighborhood schools, that it was going to clean house, and no one, in its view, who was running for re-election should be back on the board. That's how this issue came to its height. So again, I'm glad to hear your support for the neighborhood schools because it's critically important. The other thing that kind of caused me to talk about this whole background of the 1980s was looking at your chart here of the enrollment. Because when we got here in 1980, it was up around 1,600 students. When I went onto the board, we hit the all-time low here at the bottom of the graph. And I think you've been the recipient of some board packets that we had back then. We went through all kinds of discussions. We even talked about trying to sell Washburn, but not very saleable because it has wide hallways and that's not very good in the retail market. We talked about then tearing down Skokie School because it was an abandoned school. We were not using it. It was being maintained. It was at great expense. There was nobody in it. You can imagine the expense that can be trying to start up a school. So we had a big board meeting. Lots of people attended. The whole community, I think, was there. It was very contentious as we were raising this issue. And one person stood up and said, I'll write a check for $1,000, which is a lot of money back then, to save Skokie School and set up a foundation. We were, as a board, caught in a position where the community out here was saying, yes, we support keeping this magnificent old structure that has served this community so well over the history of many, many years. So the board had to figure out a solution. The solution was, yes, to go along with the community, to save Skokie School, to work with the foundation. Obviously, that was not going to create enough revenue for the expenses of the maintenance.
Sir, I'm sorry, I have to.
Okay, I'll be very quick.
Okay. I know you've been over here on this side of the table, trying to keep to the 3 minutes.
The point is, we worked with the community. We rented the school to Cove and to Winnetka Public Nursery. We spent money out of school funds, and we saved Skokie School. It turns out, 20 years later, we nearly doubled the population. Thank goodness for the community supporting the neighborhood schools. Thank goodness for the community supporting, maintaining Skokie School. And that means the classrooms on the side that I know you're thinking about taking out, those came in to be absolutely necessary. And we don't want to pay for the same buildings twice. And it has served this community well, and I hope that if there's a message from our old people back there that did this, is that you cannot predict anything other than it will change. So to me, future ready means keeping Skokie School, keeping those classrooms, figuring out an alternative to make it work, support the community in doing that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Chris Bloom. Just want to touch on a few points. I want to thank you for your time and thank you for your recognition and listening to the community and at least tabling your, whatever the phrase was, the transform option. I wanted to speak a little bit. I echo the comment about democracy and having the village here. It's great, but one key part of that is sort of transparency and accuracy. One thing that a few of us noticed was in this conversation over K-5s, a cost discussion was going on up here. And discussions about the cost of a K-5 being prohibitive or being too much. The slide from the last board meeting's presentation shows that K-5, all future ready, is the cheapest option. So when we're told when a discussion is based on something that isn't what's shown in the data that you provide, that raises all sorts of questions in our minds. And again, sort of puts the community on edge, and we start asking questions. Why would somebody say that? What's going on? So we just ask you to please keep that in mind. And if K-5 is the lowest cost option here, continue to explore it. And so I'm so thankful that that decision was made. I would also, just through the community discussions, I haven't heard anything in support of K3. There may be some more echoing of that. But the other thing I've asked this before, and I'd like a formal response, is if DLR, the consultant, is barred from bidding or receiving the actual work. In often types of projects like this, the consultant does one thing, and then it's shut off, and then you go hire an independent architect. Just want an answer on that. And the other thing I'd like to mention is I know there's been a lot of requests here for some more data and study, and that's good. But what that signals is we aren't ready to make a decision in June. The core team, Superintendent Kakana keeps saying, we'll do the best we can in 2 weeks. Well, don't do the best you can in 2 weeks, do the best you can. And if it takes 4 weeks, take 4 weeks and extend the time. The community wants to have the best answer possible, and there's no reason to rush this. Thank you.
Passing. Okay, so I have Alexis, Jill, Peter, Katie, and then Craig is already up here. So if anyone else that was on that list is going to speak.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jill Dillingham. I am a Crow Island and Skokie parent and a graduate of this wonderful school as well, myself. When my husband and I decided where we were going to land, it was a very easy decision. The Winnetka school system is absolutely the clear winner. As a product of that system, I know firsthand the benefits and the link of it supplied me not only as a student, but as a professional, and still today. The word tradition's been thrown around a lot in the past few months, and I believe it's become misdirected. Winnetka's tradition is not brick and mortar, but it's supplying a best-in-class education to all of our students. Winnetka's tradition is being a nationally ranked district. Winnetka's tradition has been to create an environment that helps our children reach their fullest potential. Winnetka's tradition has been held up by a progressive and forward-thinking curriculum and best-in-class faculty, not by cement and brick. We're talking a lot about cement and brick and facilities and fixes that are going to keep the buildings their head above water. And we ended this discussion talking about future ready. I moved back here so my kids could have that best-in-class education that Winnetka has supplied for decades and decades. And it's not about facility. It's about being able to maintain a child with the best outcome, not only as a student, but as they become a young adult and professional. And that's what our solution should be. Whatever maintains that best-in-class education and outcome for our students. We need to kind of get back to that being where we're starting from, not backing in based on, whether or not we're going to maintain a building that creates even a lot of sentiment and wonderful memories even as I walked in here tonight. So as you all move forward with whatever level of transformation, whatever it may be, I want it to be part of a community that maintains that level of excellence across the board. And I hope we can get back to that tonight.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's good to see some of you again. I had actually several points to make, which I think others have made, so I will keep this very short. My main comment tonight is about DLR group. I do think it would be good to get feedback from the board tonight on the perceived conflict of interest. It's nothing against DLR. I think they've actually done, as far as I can tell, fine work in terms of providing the board with data. But I am skeptical of the numbers that they are providing. I am skeptical of the data, the limited data that the public has seen. And I guess the point I would make is that, as far as I can tell, the complete data set, the assumptions underlying their analysis are not available to the public. They are also not the result of a competitive bidding process. We have a vendor who is incentivized to provide you with, numbers that may give them future business opportunities. I don't begrudge them that. They're in business to make money, but they should not be able to compete for the construction projects for which they are currently providing you with cost estimates. So I think at minimum it would be helpful from the board to know whether there is a prohibition in place, and if not, why not? And with that, I'll just tell you, I think you made the right decision tonight. I appreciate your support for community schools. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm a career educator, and I have the privilege of working in 21st century schools for the last 17 years. I've seen firsthand the impact of future-ready schools, and it is remarkable what children can do when we put them at the center of their learning and give them the space and resources they need to grow in a world full of exciting and unknown opportunities. I understand that change is at the heart of the decisions before us. And change principles reveal that the proposed changes make us feel a sense of loss of proximity to schools, loss of legacy, loss of tradition, and even a loss of community. It's abundantly clear that many educated and dedicated people have spent valuable time trying to solve this important problem. Thank you to the core team for their due diligence, and to the district leaders for seeking input and listening to the educators. I feel that we're at a very critical time in your vision and our vision, and it's time for us to decide what are we standing up for. And I want to challenge us to think bigger. Solving this problem isn't supposed to divide our community. While the small school research base is valid and one that I strongly support, it's a research body centered in urban school systems that are supposed to find hubs for students who are in deep urban poverty. This research isn't applied to Winnetka. And similarly, the comments about the adverse effects on transitions isn't applicable here either. So as we tackle this work as a community, despite our differences of opinion on the matter, we should aim to find common ground. We all want what's best for our kids, and I know we can all agree on that. So let's shift our energy away from being right and move towards articulating what we have in common. As we position our kids for unknown jobs and professions that don't even exist yet, let's try to forecast what our kids are going to need to be successful and work backward from that. Until we do that, and until we can find this common ground, we'll be most comfortable with the status quo. Winnetka, echoing what Jill said, has always enjoyed a reputation of being a progressive district that designs with the students' needs. So let's rally around that. And as an educator serving in an innovative network, I've seen what spaces and experience like those presented tonight can offer children. We have a tremendous opportunity in front of us, and I remain hopeful that we can do this together.
My name is Craig Whitty, and my wife Nancy and I have lived at 654 Ash Street for 37 years. Our 3 sons attended Greeley. Our house was built in 1862. The rooms are small and rectangular. And yet, even growing up in such an antiquated environment, our eldest son was able to get a PhD in medical biophysics and has several patents in the stem cell field. I do admit that we installed central air conditioning. So my question in the context of this meeting is, what exactly does future ready mean? because if it is primarily signifies a physical arrangement of classroom space, then I'm a bit skeptical. In part, that's because in my own work, I've experienced the rise of the open office movement and the trade-offs it entails. On one hand, open offices may in fact lead to greater collaboration between employees, but I also know they introduce significantly greater scope for distraction. And statistics that claim, for example, that an open office increases productivity by 29% may sound scientific, but unless the results can be replicated in a variety of controlled environments, which they never can be, they are more marketing hype than science. Albert Einstein conceived his theory of special relativity while working at a wooden desk in a rectangular room at a Swiss patent office. And it was Einstein who said, "The origin of all technical achievements is the divine curiosity and the play instinct of the working and thinking researcher, as well as the constructive fantasy of the technical inventor." In the greater scheme of things, I believe it would be a mistake to lose sight of the practical reality that it is dedicated and talented teachers working with small groups of attentive students, much more than the arrangement of desks and walls, that stimulate our curiosity and the appetite for invention. Thank you.
All right, so now we're back to the board, and if there's opening it up for discussion after we hear comments, and if we need to modify anything that we charge the core team with, as I summarized before.
Can I say something not slightly to your charge? I want to thank the members of the community again, and the members of the core team again. But the community has sent us a lot of emails. We've all read them. There is a lot of very useful perspective. And to what somebody there said, they may not all agree, but they're being provided in an effort for all of us to get to the best place. And I appreciate that. And I think it's important to say. Because this is a hard process, but just like Kristen said, we will come to a solution. And I appreciate the core team doing unbelievable volumes of work to get us to this point. We're getting there.
And I want to touch on one other thing. I want to make sure there's no concern on the board about the numbers we've been presented, and that I know that we went out through a very highly competitive process to get DLR involved, and I know that once we decide what we're going to do, it's going to go through another competitive process to get our ultimate builder, and it may or may not be DLR. So personally, I'm not seeing the concern that has been expressed by community members that somehow the numbers would not be as accurate as they possibly could be, given that they're ultimately going to be one of many bidders, right?
And we should remind you that DLR actually isn't providing the costs, it's Amoresco. There's a third party group that bid for that as well. So we have multiple bidders to provide the cost estimate, so they're working with DLR, and I think DLR, to their credit, don't quote me, there may have been another architectural firm that went through the process to have our master facility plan, so they recognize that sometimes architects aren't the best cost estimators, and so that's why they do depend on other third-party cost collaborators, so to speak, on this process. So we have Amoresco separate from DLR. They're working, obviously, with information, and that the process of the board recalls, so I think the majority of the board was involved in the process, even selecting a firm for the educational master facility plan. It was a highly regulated process as well. I think we had about a dozen firms that applied. They had to follow a very strict guideline for the RFQ and then go through a whole interview process, if you recall, a presentation, and then we had to vet them through a defined matrix and go through it. So there has been, I appreciate too, what I think Peter said, is that there isn't a question necessarily of quality, but just making sure that there are these checks and balances along the way. So there has been, even from getting the master facility plan to Amoresco providing the bidding or providing the cost estimates for us to then the next stage. There's nothing that would preclude necessarily DLR, but they would have to go through another regulated bidding process like anyone else to do any work for us.
The plan is set within the project.
Correct.
So I think so two things. One, the DLR thing, I think we should just be clear about that. I think the whole community, that's not the first time they've asked, but we, I think having sat there in the past, a long, long time ago, they think, like, hey, it's just hidden. It's not. Like, we're taxpayers, we want the best process at the lowest price. Like, that's just clear, we should just be transparent. On the future ready, because anybody who, some of you are new, but if you came 5 times ago when you guys first started using the term, I kept saying, I'm confused by this term. I don't know what it means. Future ready. I think it actually would be helpful. And one of the times, this must have been a year ago, when you used the story of the Pioneer Room, and I said to you, I liked this idea because we could redo the Pioneer Room. That could be part of our, hey, by the way, the wiring down there is not great, they don't have Wi-Fi or whatever it is, but it may not be relevant. Like, I love the fact that my daughter, who's here tonight, went through the Pioneer Room, but it may not be relevant. Maybe it's the colonized Mars experience, rather than experience, if we had a great blacksmith shop, we might not want to refurbish it, because it may not be relevant. I would love, from a future, when you guys talk about future ready, like, if this, and again, I'll say, if this was actually a classroom with 12 students and you were teaching French in here, it just isn't functional. What percentage of our space is just beyond use in the existing academic world? That would help from a sort of like, it's the baseline versus, hey, we're going to transform the whole building, versus like, 60% of the space in our school would not be relevant in a school where you just start. And that would be helpful.
So we are, as far as the analysis goes, we'll be able to, and part of the challenge has been too, is we've been talking concepts and showing images of other places and spaces, and until it becomes real to us in Winnetka and we see some of that, I think that's part of the challenge, and we've talked about that with various community members, and next time we come back, we talked about this, putting some tangible numbers around what does that mean as far as even the number of maker spaces and the common area collaborative spaces, and how does it look different than what we have, and quite frankly, Crow Island's layout, the classroom layout, the L-shaped square footage, the access to outside, that's still a very relevant layout because of what we do with kids, and it was built with our educational approach in mind, and we're trying to move forward in a way where our vision can be advanced and our educational approach can be advanced by the space as a tool. This is not new to us. This is what we did with Crow Island. And so we just know what we know today, the research we know today, and benefiting from our educators who are doing this every day to tell us this is what we could do, right? Because they do great things, there's no question. And the educators are in a very funny position in this whole process because they are very appreciative of our community and how it supports education and supports them. They also are extremely innovative. They want to do what's best. They want to try new things. And we promote that as part of our culture. And so how do we provide them with the best tools? And so we've tried to give some examples of that. And as we get closer to this, and part of this won't be completely detailed until we get to the design phase, obviously, if that happens. But we will be able to provide some clearer numbers as far as what this would look like at our schools, what this would look like as far as classroom space, and then ultimately how do our kids benefit. We've been talking a bit about that, but we'll make sure we continue to share that message as far as how do our students benefit from having space as a tool to complement the educational experience. So we can continue to bring that forward.
I want to be more specific, and I appreciate that. Is if you could tell us, instead of saying future rate, what percentage of our existing space is roughly obsolete?
I think it's hard because what do you mean by obsolete? You can go anywhere from having a teacher stand in front of a group of students who are seated in one spot and talk to them and teach them, and they're going to learn because it's a great teacher and they're enthusiastic, to an environment where I mean, I would look at that as more of a traditional teaching environment, but Winnetka's approach, when you talk about our educational approach, it's differentiation and experiential learning. And you may, I know this isn't you, Matt, I don't mean you, but people may disagree, but that is the Winnetka approach. That is what we are trying to advance. That's what, you know, our school system is about, differentiation within a classroom and experiential learning. So if you just logically think about, well, I can put everybody in a room and have a teacher there speaking, and will the kids learn? Sure, of course they're gonna learn, but how much more will they learn if they can get up and move around and we can do some more of the differentiation in small groups and experiential learning. So I think it's hard to say a space is obsolete. Now the Pioneer Room is a very specialized room, so I get your point there. But I mean, when does it ever become obsolete? It's about how I think the space matches the way that we, as a community and as a board, have decided we want to teach our kids. Giving our teachers the space that most facilitates the style of learning we want our kids to have. I'm not sure it's a direct, you know, this is perfect for it, this is perfect for that. I think there's a range in between.
Right,
I don't know what obsolete, I mean, I think you could say our electrical system is obsolete because we don't have enough plugs to support even what we have right now.
Yeah.
But as far as the space goes, I don't know.
Right, I mean, our teachers do maximize the use of the space they have. I think the real question is if we were to design a classroom or experience a learning space today, knowing what we know about teaching and learning, knowing our educational approach, knowing what we learned from our teachers as far as how they want to use space as a tool, what would that look like and why is that beneficial? That's what we can provide you, is a look as if starting, it's the Crow Island question that was asked decades ago, what would that space look like and why is that important and why is it helpful to us?
And I know Scott is not here, I'll represent him without necessarily, because he would ask the tier question, which is its tiers. Like, we could get all the windows in Crow Island. That would help slightly, okay? Or you could say, well, by the way, we don't need to do electrical. We can go get candles. Why don't we do the electrical? Let's just do candles. The great teacher. But like, so there's some, and it's not us, right?
Right, no.
It's not what we do, that's what you do. I would ask you to say, look, if you asked of the space that is roughly 90%, Crow Island is 90% of the way, because of, I'm picking a number, what percent of our space is 50%? Like, this would not function well for a 12-person French class. I think we can all agree this would be a rough space for it. So you'd say, hey, you know what, we shouldn't do this. This should be redone. What percentage of our space, and this is what I don't understand and we're going to vote on, and this is what I think the community thinks when we say future ready. It's not necessarily future ready because we want to modernize. Of course we want to modern stuff. But some percentage of our existing physical space is antiquated. Maybe not obsolete, Dawn, but antiquated.
Less than desirable.
As an example of that, perhaps the library here, before it got converted into a combination library makerspace, might have fit more your definition of older style, antiquated, something? Is that an explanation here? Perfect.
And we're starting to do that even at Washburn, for instance. You've heard about the team that's really trying to innovate its space because of the interdisciplinary programming that's going on, and how is their current space limiting their ability to do that? And what is the obsolete component, so to speak, or the components of our current configuration to enact our actual educational vision and programming? So we have that sort of thing.
Is that everyone good? Okay, so do you have what you need?
Yes, I think we have good direction, and just to clarify it again, we're not, the core team will meet and do its due diligence. It doesn't mean that at the end of 2 weeks, whatever is completed is all that we're going to do. It's just a matter of we'll be able to come forward with quality work within the time frame we have and determine at that time what additional information we would need or additional time if that's necessary. So we appreciate this. The core team is looking forward to this level of direction to be able to kind of move and be a bit more productive in its work and dig a little deeper. So we appreciate the board's direction, and we'll look forward to the next meeting too.
Okay, so now we have a consent agenda, which is very quick, which we need to get through very quickly. So a motion is requested that the school board approve the personnel report, including employment certified staff, employment classified staff, resignation certified staff, resignation classified staff, change of status certified staff.
I'll move.
And roll call?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes.
There you go. Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.